Hey my friends, welcome to At Home with Gigi. I'm Gwen. Today I'm sharing with you some of my favorite Christmas decoupage DIYs. If you're looking for cozy vintage charm for the holidays, you're in the right place. So grab something warm to sip on, settle in, and let's get started. We're going to be creating my version of the window frame with gift bags, except for I'm going to be using 4 individual picture frames and then napkins. These came from Walmart, but I've had them for several years. Now you can use whatever you might have on hand from the thrift store or even pick some up from the Dollar Tree. And we're also going to be using these napkins instead of a gift bag. Aren't they absolutely gorgeous? These came from Napkin World. And to attach the picture frames, I'm going to be using a combination of Gorilla Gel Glue for the permanent hold and then a little bit of hot glue just for that immediate hold. Off camera, I did go ahead and remove the glass and the kickstands from each of the frames. Just makes it easier to work with. Now these are really substantial frames, so I wanted to make sure they had some extra support and security, so I'm just using hot glue for this, but I am adding these extra large popsicle sticks. You can get these at Walmart, and just along each of the seams. And I've just repeated the exact same process to glue the 2 sections together using a combination of Gorilla Gel Glue and hot glue, and then I'll come back in and add one last popsicle stick, like I said, just for some extra support. I'm going to decoupage my napkins onto poster board, and this came from the Dollar Tree, and I'm going to use the insert from the picture frame as my template and just cut out 4 pieces. Once I'm finished cutting out each of the pieces of poster board, I'm going to add a layer of Mod Podge to each of them. Now mine started to curl up, so after they dried, I just stacked some books on them overnight and it just flattened them right out. Now you will want to make sure all of your plies are removed from the back of your napkin, just to make sure it's going to adhere to your surface. And I'm cutting out the size that I want, lining it up as best I can on my square poster board, and very gently placing the parchment paper on top so as not to move my napkin. And we're going to use the iron-on method to attach the napkin to the poster board. That's just using heat to reactivate that Mod Podge that we let dry on the poster board, and y'all, it gives it such a wonderful finish, just perfect every time. I'm using a very fine grit sandpaper to remove the excess napkin, and then I'll repeat this process for each of the other 3 napkins. Now I want the window to have a very wintry, snowy look to it, and to achieve that we're going to be using a mixture of hot glue and glitter, and I'm just putting down a layer of hot glue, making it look like icicles melting down the window, and I'm going to come back while the glue is still soft and sprinkle in the white and then the silver glitter. Now in my opinion, I added way too much of the silver glitter. The window is gray, so it just kind of blended in with it and didn't really pop out and look kind of snowy, but we will go back in just a bit and fix that. I just want to take a second and say hello. I'm Gwen. Welcome to At Home with Gigi. If you're new here, I hope you'll take a moment and hit that subscribe button if you're enjoying my video. If you're returning, thank you so much for returning. As always, I truly appreciate you and so happy to have you here. We're going to use some of these cedar branches, and this came from Amazon. I'll try to remember to link it down below. And I want them to just kind of curve around the corners of my frame. And I'm just using hot glue to attach them. And then on top of that, I'm using some of these white ferns that came from Dollar Tree. And this is the end of what I have in my stash. I'm so sad to see them go. And then on top of that, I'm just adding in some pine cones. Now, I want this to be more of a winter wonderland look, not a Christmassy look. So I'm not adding in any red berries or anything like that, but certainly you can choose to add in whatever you might want. I just repeated the process on the other end of the frame because I want them to mirror each other. And then I'm going to come back in with just some white acrylic paint from Apple Barrel, and I'm a little tiny brush. I'm just going over the icicles, and where it looks so silvery, I'm just painting over each one. Now this did take just a minute, but to me it was so worth it because I was able to get that winter wonderland, just snowy look that I was looking for. And I also just kind of dabbed over my pine cones to make those look like they were brushed by snow. I'm going to go ahead and pop in each of the poster boards with the napkins, and I've already added the glass back in, but later on I do go in and remove it because I just thought it looked better that way. And one of the frames was a tiny bit smaller than the other three, so it just didn't quite match up, and I just wasn't real happy with the way the center of my frame looked. So I'm popping in this gorgeous snowflake from the Dollar Tree. I think it's the perfect finishing touch, and I am so in love with this piece, y'all. It is just amazing to me. I know I created it, so that might be a little bit big-headed of me, but I absolutely love it. You can use this throughout the entire holidays, from Christmas all the way through the winter months. And that is exactly what I'm going to do. I would love to know what y'all's thoughts are. We're going to start this project by giving each of our paper mache letters 2 coats of Waverly's chalk paint in the color white. And my letters came from Michael's, but I'm sure you can pick them up at Hobby Lobby or even order them from Amazon. This project is actually a dupe of something I saw on QVC. They were part of the Valerie Parhill collection. If you know anything about her, she has amazing Christmas pieces. They're a little on the pricey side. I actually have a few pieces. But when I saw this, I was like, oh my goodness, I think I can remake this. I had a coupon from Michael, so I got all 3 of these paper mache letters for about $10 or a little less. Scrapbook paper I'm going to be using, I had it on hand, but it actually did come from Hobby Lobby. But I had it on hand from the previous year. So I'm like, I can make this, but I'm going to insert a picture at the end, and you're going to have to tell me if I got close. You do want to make sure your paint is completely dry before you decoupage the scrapbook paper. I'm just adding a very generous layer of Mod Podge before I place the scrapbook paper, and then I'm just using my hands to smooth it out. You can always use a brayer or plastic wrap. I like to use both. But for this, because the paper is so thick, I'm just using my hands and it works just fine. Just line it up and just smooth it out, making sure you're getting any air bubbles or any excess Mod Podge that might be up under there. I set it aside for a few hours and let it dry completely, and then I just used sandpaper and a nail file to remove the excess scrapbook paper. Now you can absolutely stop at this point. They are so pretty just as they are. But because I'm duping the pieces from QVC and each of the letters were outlined in half beads, we're going to continue on. Now I am duping those pieces and I'm trying to keep it within a certain price point. I'm going to use these self-adhesive beads from the Dollar Tree. Now they are quite shiny. So I'm going to use some white chalk paint just to take that shine down, and then I'm also going to brush over the beads with some antiquing wax to give it that distressed look that the pieces have on QVC. And then once I get the antiquing wax down, I am going to come back with the baby wipe and just wipe away that excess. Now these beads do have a sticky residue on the back, but I didn't want to rely on that alone, so I'm using Mod Podge on top of the scrapbook paper just to make sure that these beads are going to stay. And these beads are very small, so it can get a little bit tedious when hard. So I just worked in small sections, used my tweezers and little tiny scissors. Those are your friends with this project like this. Or if you're not on a budget like I am, or trying to keep it under a certain dollar amount, you can use larger half wooden beads and it goes a lot faster. Once all the beads are in place, I do go back over each of the letters with another layer of Mod Podge right on top of those beads just to make sure that everything is sealed down and they're not going to pop up. And the three pieces from QVC were very heavily distressed. Now, I didn't want mine that distressed, so I'm just very lightly dry brushing over it with some white paint and just using a soft cloth and wiping it back. And as you can see here on the screen, these are the pieces from QVC, but I love how mine turned out. They're not exactly like them, they're pretty close, but I'd like to know what you think. Did I come close to duping them? I'm going to be creating a double-sided ornament using this wooden piece from Michael's. I bought it last year. They had it 90% off. It was a little dinged up, had a chunk missing out of it. Gave it a good sanding down and then 2 coats of Waverly's chalk paint in the color Snow White. Next, I'm going to use the color Antique Gold from Folk Art, and I'm going to paint around the outside of the ornament, and then once that's dry, I'm going to tape it off and then paint the top as well. I've already added a layer of Mod Podge to both sides of the ornament and let that dry because we are going to be decoupaging both sides. This is one of the most beautiful napkins that I have ever used. I absolutely love this, but I do want to show you that it is 3-ply, so you do want to check your napkins and make sure that you remove all the plies. Some of them are 2, some of them are 3, because if you don't remove those, it's not going to stick to your surface when you start to decoupage it. And I'm just lining it up there as best I can. I want a good crisp line across the top, so I'm going to use just the tip of my iron and tap, tap, tap to reactivate that Mod Podge so it'll stick and not move around while I place my parchment sheet on top. And I'm just placing that on top to protect my napkin. My iron's on low heat, and we're using the heat from the iron to reactivate that Mod Podge. And y'all, it gives you a perfect finish. I would say 99.9% of the time, which is almost perfect. Then I'm just going to hit it with my nail file and remove that excess napkin. For the other side of the ornament, I created an image in Canva and I just printed it on a sheet of tissue paper, just like you'd put into a gift bag. I wrapped it around a piece of printing paper. The key here is to tape it down really, really well so it will not jam up your printer. I just have a plain old inkjet printer, nothing fancy. Printed it out. This is one of my favorite things to do. To remove the excess tissue, I'm going to use a small paintbrush and water. I'm just going to lightly run it along the edges of my image and then just gently tear that excess tissue away. And I'll just keep tearing it away until I get the shape that I want. I love this method. To me, the uneven and organic edges give your project a much more natural appearance. I'm going to use the heat method to attach the tissue on this side just like I did on the other side. And then I took the ornament outside and I used spray Mod Podge on both sides. Next, we're going to add some embellishments to each side of the ornaments. We're going to do each side a little differently. On the side of the angel, I'm just going to pop in some of this little sweet greenery, and this is from a pick, I believe from Walmart. And then right in the center to cover up some of that hot glue. I'm not sure what this little piece is called. It was in a bag of pine cones and things from the Dollar Tree, but I'm just going to pop that right in the center. I felt that it needed a little bit of color, so I'm just going to add in a little bit of this red pit berry on each side with the greenery, and mine came from the Dollar Tree. We're We're going to keep the other side of the ornament pretty simple. I'm just making a little messy bow with some ribbon from the Dollar Tree and Walmart. And then I'm just going to tie it right in the center with some of this little tiny gold ribbon. And this is the last of it. I love this stuff. I cannot remember where I got it from, but I want to get some more. I love this for bows like this. But anyway, I'm just tying a little knot there, and then I'm just going to snip off those ends and fluff it out a bit, and using some hot glue, pop it right at the top of the ornament, and that's it for this side. I think just simple and beautiful and so elegant. I just love this. I love how the gold ribbon peeks out from the other side of the ornament. From this side, it looks like angel wings, and it just makes it so much more special. This was truly so easy to make, and it really was very inexpensive. First DIY, we're going to be using this flat ornament from the Dollar Tree, and I'm going to start by giving both sides of the ornament a coat of Mod Podge, and I'm doing this to prevent my paint from chipping off. After the Mod Podge is dried, I'm going to use Waverly chalk paint in white and a makeup sponge that I've torn in half, and as you can see, I'm just going around and just stippling the paint on. I don't want it to have a nice smooth finished look. I want it to look kind of textured, and I'm going to give it 2 coats, and I'm just going to let it dry in between each coat. I'm going to use this gorgeous napkin, and this napkin came from Abril Martinez at Crafter in the Rough, and I'm at a napkin exchange every month, and she sent this to me, and I just love it. But I am making sure I'm pulling off this back layer, because if you don't, your napkin will not adhere to your surface. Ask me how I know that. And instead of using scissors to cut out the little boots, I'm just using a tiny paintbrush with some water. You do want to be careful that when you're removing the excess napkin that you don't tear your little boots. I'm just very carefully removing that excess napkin, going back in and dampening the edges when you need to. Then I'm just going to add a layer of Mod Podge to the front of my ornament. And I'm going to line these boots up as best I can. As you can see, I placed it down and then I had to lift it back up and reposition it. And if you're careful, you can do that. Most of the time, not always, so just be careful that you don't tear your napkin. And I like to use a paintbrush, and I also love to use the plastic wrap. Both work well for me, and I just kind of alternate back and forth between the two with this project. But you do want to just go over and just smooth it out and try to get as much of the air bubbles and wrinkles out as you can. And this is going to be a 2-sided ornament, so I've done the other side as well. But I think these little boots are so stinking cute with the kitten and the little mouse. Thank you so much, Abril, for sending this napkin to me. Now I want my ornament to look like it has snow on it, so I'm mixing together this lightweight spackling. This came from Amazon, and Waverly's chalk paint in white, and I just kept mixing it until I got the consistency and texture I wanted. Now I'm just using one of these little Dollar Tree sponges, and I'm just going around and just pouncing it around my ornament. Now this is strictly optional. You could have just stopped right after you put the napkin on there and Mod Podged it down. You could have stopped right there, but like I said, I want it to look like it's covered in snow. And I seen this on YouTube, and if I can remember the lady's channel, I will link it down below. But I seen her doing some ornaments, and I was like, oh my goodness, I have to try that, and I love it. I think it is so pretty. You're going to have to tell me what you think at the end. It was a little bit time consuming because I was trying not to get any on my boots. I was trying to get up just as close as I possibly could. I did go back in, as you'll see in a minute, with a little tiny brush and just adding some of that spackling and paint mixture. And by the way, this lightweight spackle, it came from Amazon. It does cost more than what you would pay for the spackling at the Dollar Tree, but it's so worth it. It is a pure white, doesn't have that grayish tinge that the Dollar Tree spackling has. After it dried completely, I took it outside and I gave it a good spray of the spray Mod Podge, and while it was still wet, I came in and I'm just sprinkling some of this very fine glitter, and that came from Walmart, and I'm just doing both sides. And then it looks like I'm putting a lot, but it's barely any coming out. I think more landed on my table than actually on my ornament. And then I just took it outside, sprayed it again, let it completely dry. And as you can see, I did add a little tiny bow to it and one of these little flowers. And the ribbon and the flower came from it came from Walmart back in their fabric section. But tell me what you think. I love this. I just think it is absolutely beautiful. But would you leave the bow on, or would you do it without the bow? For this project, you're going to need some type of cutting board, and this one came from the dollar spot at Walmart. I actually got it on clearance for $3, and I'm going to go ahead and give it 2 coats of Waverly chalk paint in Snow White. Once it had dried, I went ahead and taped off the center of the cutting board because I'm going to be painting the top and the bottom section with crimson from Waverly. Now, I started out using a paintbrush, and the paintbrush was way too small, and I just didn't care for the paint stroke marks that it was leaving, so I switched over to one of these little sponge daubers. And I don't know about anybody else, but I've gotten to where I prefer to paint with these. It just leaves to me, a much smoother appearance. I don't know, just my opinion. I did give each section 2 coats. Now, I did not get my tape exactly even on each side right here where I'm peeling it away. So once everything dried, I went back in and taped it off on each side again. I probably came in maybe 1/4 of an inch, and just using a teeny little tiny one of these sponge daubers, I just painted it along those sides and brought the red up a little bit more onto the top of the cutting board. And you'll see in just a second what I mean. It made it look like it was framing the white part, and I think that looks much better. For this next part, I've cut out a section of gift tissue, and I'm just taping it down really well to a sheet of printing paper. Now, the key here is your tissue needs to be very snug around this paper, and you need to make sure your tape is really smoothed out. You do not want to jam up your printer. I use this technique all the time with tissue paper and napkins, and it's almost a perfect printout every time. Now, the inspiration for this was a recipe that was on a Pioneer Woman napkin for gingerbread. I just typed it up in Canva, added a couple of little cutesy gingerbread and gingerbread cookies on here, and y'all, I love using white tissue paper because it's almost transparent once you decoupage it onto your surface. You'll see what I mean here in just a moment. And whenever I cut this out, it was not perfect. I tried to get it as close as I could because I didn't want to sand the edges and mess up my red paint, but you'll see it's almost just perfect. Aren't these gingerbread so cute? They're actually ornaments from the Dollar Tree, and I just removed the hangers from the top of them. And y'all give me some grace here, my handwriting is not the best. I'm just freehanding the words fresh baked, and then I'm going to set that aside and let them dry while I move on to the next part. To frame the recipe, we're going to be going all the way around the recipe with this red and white trim. And I'm using just a little bit of hot glue, burning my fingers in the process. But anyway, we're just going to go all the way around, and I'm starting at the center for a reason, and you'll see in a couple of minutes why. We will camouflage where the 2 ends will meet. Before I attach the gingerbread, I want to make sure of my placement, and then I'll just use a combination of E6000 and hot glue. To camouflage where the two pieces of trim meet, I'm going to use this little tiny baby gingerbread, add a little bit of hot glue, and just pop them right on top of where those two ends meet. We're going to make a quick messy bow, and y'all, this is just ribbon that's from the Dollar Tree, Dollar General, Walmart, just stuff that I've had on hand for quite some time. And I don't know about anybody else, but when I make a messy bow, no matter how much I measure it by the first piece that I cut, each piece seems to get successively longer. I don't know how I do that, but anyway, I'm just taking a piece of baker's twine, red and white, just wrapping it around the center of the bow several times, and then I'll tie it off in a knot. Now, I cut the ends of this string off a little too short, and I want to make sure that it's not going to slip out of the knot, so I'm just adding an extra little bit of hot glue onto each of those little nubs, and then I'll kind of pinch it with my finger, and it just kind of creates a seal there that will hopefully keep it from coming undone. Then add a little more hot glue or a whole lot more hot glue and just pop my bow right on the top of the cutting board. I am so happy with how this little cutting board turned out. I think it is just super, super cute, but I'd love to know what your thoughts are. Y'all are not going to believe how quick and easy this DIY is. We're going to be using these two glass vases from the Dollar Tree. I took them outside, gave them one coat only of the frosted glass spray from Rust-Oleum because I don't want them to be opaque. I want you to be able to see through them. We're going to put some beautiful candles in them. We are going to be creating our own designs to go on the vases, and I've taken a sheet of tissue paper, the kind you stuff in gift bags, cut it down, wrapped it around a piece of printing paper, taped it down really, really well. We don't want to jam up our printer. And on an inkjet printer, I printed off these cardinals. Now, I found mine on Canva, but if you don't have access to Canva, they do have a free version, but you can also Google cardinals, and there's free clip art that you can print off that way. Or you can just simply use a napkin. But anyway, I'm going to fussy cut out my cardinals in the greenery. I just prefer it for this project. I'm just going to try to make sure my cardinal is as centered and straight as I possibly can, and to keep him from moving around, I'm just going to hold him in place with one hand while I add my Mod Podge. Now, I'm trying very hard not to add too much Mod Podge. I can get a little heavy-handed at times because I was afraid this red ink, it might bleed, but I did not have any bleeding whatsoever, thankfully. And I'll explain to you in just a moment what I do to prevent that. I'm just using this sponge, and I'm just dabbing it and tap, tap, tapping. I want to say a special thank you to one of my sweet subscribers, Cynthia. The last time I tried this, I used a wet sponge and my project bled just a little bit, and she told me that she uses a dry sponge. So my sponge is dry this time, Cynthia, and I did not have any bleeding whatsoever, so thank you so much. But again, I'm just tap, tap, tapping and just smoothing everything out as best I can. Now, you can also use plastic wrap That is something that I love to do, but I also like to try new things sometimes as well. Now, what I do to prevent bleeding when I print on tissue, I spray my project with hairspray. I let it dry completely, and I put my oven on low heat, about 200, put it in there for about 5 minutes. This is not for everybody, so do it at your own discretion. I stand right there by it, making sure nothing is going to go wrong, because you just have to use caution. I'm going to put a piece of plastic wrap over the tissue because I really want to smooth everything out, get out any excess Mod Podge, because this is glass. Everything will show. Get out any wrinkles that might still be there. There's very few, y'all. Tissue is so forgiving. I love working with it. And then I'm just continuing to smooth everything out, just making sure I want it to look like it's an actual part of the glass. And I can't wait for y'all to see the end result and tell me what you think. I think I've succeeded, but hey, you tell me. Just be careful when you're lifting up the plastic wrap because it will be sticky. And then I just repeated the exact same process on the other vase. It was so easy, so fast. Y'all see me doing the little happy dance. I'm so happy and so pleased with how this turned out. They are just absolutely beautiful, at least in my opinion. But you don't have to put cardinals on your vases. You could use any design, any Santas, angels, poinsettias, whatever, or even during the spring or summer, fall, pumpkins, bunny rabbits, whatever might be the case. It would be just a very simple and inexpensive project to make. I've gone ahead and wrapped the pages of the book with some plastic wrap, and I'm just holding everything in place with some masking tape. It'll keep from damaging your book whenever I remove the plastic. And I'm doing this because we're going to paint the book, and I'm going to give it 2 coats of Rust-Oleum's Linen White, but I will let that dry in between each coat. Now, if you're wondering why I wrap the pages in plastic, I'm a very messy painter, so I want to protect them. Some people, I believe, do paint the pages of a book. I prefer not to. I want it to look as natural as possible, even though we're going to be decoupaging it and turning it into a riser. We're going to be decoupaging this beautiful tissue to the book. I believe this came from Walmart. I'm not 100% sure. I've had it for a year or two, but it is so pretty, y'all. I wish you could see it in person. The camera does not do it justice, and I wanted something very neutral because I plan on keeping it up all the way through the holidays into, the winter season. Of course, you can use whatever tissue you may have on hand. You could even use napkins if you have some that are big enough. But I'm just adding a very generous layer of Mod Podge to the entire book, front and back, and to the spine. I'm going to let that dry, and then we'll move on to the next step. Once the Mod Podge is dry, we're going to use the heat method to attach the tissue to the book. And once I get my placement just right, I'm going to cover the tissue with a sheet of parchment paper just to protect the surface. And with my iron on low heat, I like to start in the center of my project. That's just my preference. There's no right or wrong way. I like to start in the center and just work my way around my project. And the heat from the iron reactivates that Mod Podge and causes the tissue to adhere to your surface. Now I'm using just the edge of the iron. Now this is sped up a little bit. I'm going very, very slowly and carefully because I want to make sure the tissue is going to adhere to that little indentation that runs along the spine of the book, because I really want it to look like this is the cover of the book. And then I'm going to stand it on the end. I'll put my parchment paper over the spine of the book. Now be careful here that you don't burn your fingers. I'm just going to hold everything in place and then just very carefully work my way along that spine to make sure the tissue is going to adhere really well and not have any bubbles or wrinkles or anything like that. Then I'll just repeat the exact same process on the back cover. And y'all, it's just that easy. I'm just going to use my little handy dandy finger sander and just remove any excess tissue all the way around the book. Now, using the sander to remove the excess tissue did cause the paint to come off in some areas, so I just took a tiny little paintbrush and just touched those areas up. Y'all, I love this. I think it's so pretty. You could stop right here and this would just be perfect. But we're going to continue on, of course. This black and red ribbon came from Hobby Lobby. Now, originally I meant to add black and white buffalo check. Completely forgot. Picked this up and just ran with it. But anywho, I love it. I'll still keep this up through the winter holidays. I don't mind red through the winter holidays. It gives a little bit of pop of color during those dreary January and February months. But anyway, just using a little bit of hot glue to attach the ribbon to the back side of the book. Of course, here you can use any color ribbon that you want, or you don't even have to use ribbon for this. You can use twine if you would like. Y'all, I don't know where my brain was when I was making this project, but as I'm putting the ribbon on, I'm realizing I have completely forgot to add the feet to make this a riser. So I had painted 4 of these large beads, and these came from Amazon, and I'm just going to attach them to the bottom of the book with hot glue. Now, you can use E6000 or Gorilla Gel glue for a more permanent hold if you want. I made a simple little awareness bow, wrapped a piece of ribbon around the center to cover up the pipe cleaner, and then we're just going to pop in a few little pieces of this greenery, and the greenery came from the Dollar Tree. Y'all, I have not seen this year at any of my local Dollar Trees. I really hope I can find some, because I've just about used all of it up, especially after the next project that's coming up here soon. And I love this stuff. It's so inexpensive, but it is so nice. I really love it to add it into little projects like this. And then to cover up everything, I'm just going to pop another little pine cone right in the center. Now, my intentions was to stop right here. I even filmed the final reveal, as you can see. And then I just felt that the book needed something along the spine. It was just too bare, so I decided to add the word peace. And the next time I was at Walmart, I picked up these 3D letters. And y'all, I'm starting with the letter A in the center letter of the word. This is what works for me to get my spacing just right. You put it on however you choose, but it works for me. And I'm so happy that I went back and did this, because I feel that it just gives it that extra little bump that this project needed. I think this turned out so cute, and it was just very easy to make, and you really can adjust this to your color scheme or whatever your taste may be, and you can also create one for any season of the year. For this project, we're going to be using this sign from the Dollar Tree, and it's got some glitter on it. We're going to go ahead and sand all of that off and then give it a good wipe down. We don't want any of the residue from the glitter on there, because we are going to be painting it. Now, because this is made out of that particle board type stuff, I did let it dry completely before I painted it, and I'm using the color Truffle from Waverly, and I give it 2 coats, and I let it dry in between each coat. Now, we're going to be doing the Crackle technique on this sign, and how to do that, you want to start with a dark base, or at least most people start with the dark base. You really can use whatever color you want. I'm using the Truffle, and then once I put that down, I'm going to let that dry, and then I'm going to come in with just plain old school glue. You can use any medium that you want, but my favorite is just plain old school glue. I'm using Elmer's, that's what I have on hand, and I'm just going to put down a very generous layer and then just spread that out. The theory is the thicker the layer of glue you put down, the larger the crackle you'll get. The thinner the layer of glue, the smaller or thinner crackle you'll get. I need to work on getting a more even layer of glue whenever I do the crackle effect, because mine usually has a little bit of large crackle and a little bit of small crackle. That's just the way it works. I don't mind. I love it. I just love the vintagey, chippy look that this gives me. It's not for everybody. If you don't like this, you can totally skip this step. Now, usually I let my glue set up for a minute or two, maybe 5 at the most, but y'all, I got sidetracked, and I think this actually set for like 10 or 15 minutes, so you can see it's dried really well. I wasn't for sure how this was going to work. So just moving forward with the project, I'm using Rust-Oleum's Linen White in just a sponge applicator. You can use a regular brush if that's what you choose. Now the trick to this is not to go over your paint more than 2 or 3 times, because the more you mix that paint and glue together, the more it's going to lessen the crackle effect. As you can see, the crackles are already starting to form, and whoo, y'all, I was so relieved to see those crackles, because I didn't know how this was going to turn out with letting my glue dry down so much. But I will tell you, I let this set up overnight just to make sure the paint and everything was just completely dry before I add my picture to the front of the sign. I just showed you in the previous DIY how I taped the tissue to the printing paper, so we're just going to breeze right on through this part. I created this image or graphic in Canva, and I'll link it down below for you. It's absolutely free to you. And I'm going to just go ahead and remove the excess tissue. Now you'll see in just a moment, I start out using what I call the water method, just a little tiny paintbrush and some water, and changed my mind and then decided just to use my fingers and just very gently tear away that excess paper. I want the outer edges of my graphic to be very uneven, kind of organic looking. That's always my preferred method, but if you prefer to just cut it out with your scissors, that's perfectly fine as well. I just thought the uneven edges would blend in better with my sign. I'm going to put down a very generous layer of Mod Podge, spread that out, let it dry, and then we're going to use the heat method to attach our image to the sign. I felt that the image was just a little too crisp and clean for this project, so I'm just going to crinkle it up just a little bit. Just be careful you don't tear your image. Just crinkling it up, then I'll straighten it back out, find my placement on the sign, and we're going to be using the heat method to attach our image. Now you've seen me already put the Mod Podge down, let it dry, and I'm going to place this sheet of parchment paper over the top to protect it, and my iron's on low heat, and that heat reactivates your Mod Podge and it causes your image to attach or adhere to your sign. We're going to add some greenery to the top and bottom of our sign, and mine came from Amazon. I'll link it down below for you if you're interested. I've already snipped off the ends, the little metal points, and just kind of give it a little bend and wiggle to where it's not sticking out so straight whenever you hot glue it at the top, and then I'll just hold it in place till it sets up. And I've made a very simple little bow out of some red burlap ribbon. This also came from the Dollar Tree. Don't know if they still have it. This is my last bit, and I found this a couple of years ago. And I'm just going to place it right in the center to cover up where the two pieces meet. I'm going to do the exact same thing with the greenery at the bottom, but instead of adding a bow, we're going to add in 3 little tiny pine cones, and I'm making mine a sitter. You can absolutely make this a hanging sign if you want, just by adding a, twine and beads, whatever you want to do, but mine's going to be a shelf sitter. And when I set it up, I realized that the greenery at the bottom was just hanging down and looking kind of wonky and smushed. So I am going to come back in and snip off those 2 pieces and then just kind of shorten them up just a little bit, and then I'll just reattach them with a little more hot glue. To help the sign set up, I took 3 Jenga blocks, gave them a coat of Waverly's chalk paint in the color Truffle, and then I'm just going to use hot glue to attach them to the back of the sign. I just love how this turned out. I think it is so pretty. For whatever reason, it just speaks to me. I love it. I did make a couple of changes off camera. When I was filming my final reveal, I noticed that the bow needed just a little something. So I added in some pine cones up there as well, a couple of more little sprigs of greenery, and touched up a couple of the pine cones that didn't have much snow on them with just a little bit of white paint, and I think that was just the extra little touch. I might go back and snip off that crazy green at the top that's sticking out a little crazy, not sure yet, but I think that the little bit of wild look to it is just perfect for this piece. For this DIY, we're going to make a hanging sign, and we're going to use this long board from the Dollar Tree. I've sanded it down really well, filled the 2 holes at the top, and give it 2 coats of Waverly's chalk paint in the color Snow White. Once the paint is completely dry, I'm going to distress the board using candle wax. And how you do that, you just take an old candle, and this one's from the Dollar Tree, and just lightly run it over the surface of your board. Now if you're not getting much wax to come off, you can hit it with your blow dryer and it'll soften that candle up and cause it to glide over your surface a whole lot easier. Now, if distressing is not your thing and it's not for everybody, you can totally skip this step and just go straight to painting your board. And the color paint that I'm using is Sage Blossom. It is a beautiful paint from Folk Art. It might be a little bit bright and springy for some, but I love this color, and I'm going to distress it and dirty it up a little bit, so it's going to be perfect. I can't wait for you to see the final result. Now I did let this set overnight to make sure the paint is completely dry before I come back with my scraper and remove some of the paint and start the distressing process. Now I'm going to scrape along the edges, the sides, down the center, just wherever I want some distressing. I did cover the board with the wax, but I didn't really just press down and just rub that wax into it. I just lightly went over the whole board. If you want some heavier distressing, obviously add more wax or just really scrape your board. I'm happy with what I'm seeing, although I do go back in just a bit and sand along the edges for a little more distressing, but we'll get there in just a moment. For our next step, we're going to add Waverly's Antiquing Wax, and I'm just using a chunk of sea sponge. It's just from a bath sponge that I get at the Dollar Tree. Just tore a piece off, and I'm going to apply it. I'm going to put a very heavy coat down. I'm just applying it straight out of the bottle. I didn't dilute it with water or anything. I'm going to let that sink in for a moment, and then I'm going to come back in with the baby wipe and wipe away the excess, and this will help to tone down that bright green paint that we used. We're going to add the word joy to the front of our sign, and we're going to use this wood round for the O, and I've already given it 2 coats of Apple Barrel's acrylic paint in the color Snow White. Let that dry, and now we're going to add a coat of Mod Podge. I'm also going to set that aside and let it dry. We're going to be decoupaging a section of this beautiful napkin. And now this napkin came from Napkin World. You go to eBay, type in the search bar Napkin World, and you will get a beautiful selection of napkins. But anyway, you want to make sure that you remove all the plies from this napkin. This is a 3-ply, so you will want to make sure you remove all of those. And we're going to be using the heat method to apply this napkin to the wood round. I've just centered it up as best I can, and then I'm putting a sheet of parchment paper over the top. And then I'm just going to use my little heat press and go over the surface of the wood round until that heat reactivates your Mod Podge and causes the napkin to stick to your surface. And then we'll just hit it with my little finger sander and remove that excess napkin. The J and the Y are about 6 inches long, and they came from Amazon. And I do want to distress them just a little bit so they'll blend in with the rest of the project. As I mentioned earlier, if you're not a fan of distressing, you do not have to do that for any parts of this project. You can absolutely skip it. Then I'm just going to use a combination of E6000 and hot glue to attach the letters and the wood round to the board. Now I did cheat just a little bit. I marked out exactly where I wanted my letters to go just so I can keep them straight and hopefully even. These pieces are substantial, the J and Y, so even with the hot glue, ideally you'd want to let them sit at least 12 to 24 hours before you move on to the next part. And I'm just going to add some ribbon to the very top of the sign, and I'm just using, I believe this is from Hobby Lobby, it might be Amazon, I can't remember at the moment, but I'm just going to put a strip across the top and then just hot glue the two ends on the back side of the sign. To continue with the rustic farmhouse vibe, I'm going to wrap some twine around the top of the sign, right on top of the ribbon, and then just secure it on the back of the sign. And then I'm going to take another little piece of ribbon and just fold it over a couple of times and pinch it in the center and tie it off with some more twine and just make a cute little bow to go right in the corner. Now, a little trick I like to use whenever I snip off the ends of my twine to keep it from fraying and coming undone, I just add a tiny bit of super glue on each end, and then I'll trim it off just a little bit more if it needs it, and it keeps it from fraying or the knot coming undone every single time. As our final little touch, we're going to add in this cute little silver bell from the Dollar Tree right in the center of the bow to cover up the twine. But as I was filming the final reveal, I just did not like how the bow looked, so I removed it real quick and just made a little simple awareness bow and hot glued that right back in the same place as the other bow, and then popped that little silver bell right back in the center. And I think it was just so much better. But I'd like to know what you think. Which bow do you prefer? For this project, we're going to be creating a rather large ornament out of this leftover scrap piece of cardboard and a beautiful napkin. And yes, I know my cardboard is not even there at the top, but this was a trial piece for the new gadget I got a couple of weeks ago, and as a crafter, you know you never throw anything away. So this was my first run at trying to cut a complete circle. Didn't work, I kept it, and so we're going to use it for this project. And I'm going in and giving the piece of cardboard one coat of Waverly chalk paint in Snow White. And if you watch any of my videos, you know anytime I decoupage, I always like to paint my background of whatever I'm going to be decoupaging on. I like it white. To me, it just makes my napkin, tissue, decoupage paper, whatever I'm using, it just makes it pop. Once that was dry, I went in with a coat of Mod Podge, let that dry, and we're going to be using the iron-on method to attach this gorgeous napkin. Isn't this beautiful? Oh, and I'm just showing you I've removed the other two plies because this was a 3-ply napkin. Always make sure you remove those extra plies before you start to decoupage. This came from Napkin World, and I got this last year and just never got around to using it, and I thought this would just be the perfect time to use it. And I'm trying to see what would be the best placement. I want to get as much of this beautiful corner on my cardboard round as I can. The iron-on method is my favorite way to decoupage. It gives you such a smooth, clean finish. You just use a sheet of parchment paper on top of your napkin to keep from damaging it. Your iron is on very low heat, and I like to start in the center of my project and just work my way out and then all the way around the edges just to make sure I'm reactivating all of that Mod Podge and that my napkin, tissue, whatever I'm using is going to adhere to that surface. As you'll see in just a second, it is such a perfect clean finish. I absolutely love it. and it's so easy. And I'm just going to hit it with my little finger sander and then just go around and just remove that excess napkin. I'm saving the napkin for another project. You know we crafters never throw anything away, right? Now I'm using a very fine grit sandpaper because I don't want to tear my napkin. And after I finished removing the excess napkin, I did go around the edges of the cardboard and just smoothed out any little scragglies that might have been left over. Now I do want to cover up the rough edges of this cardboard, and I'm going to be using this twine cord, whatever you want to call it. And this came from Walmart. Now I got this last year, so I don't know if they're going to have it again this year. And I learned my lesson here the first go around. I added a little too much hot glue. My fingers stuck to the cord and the cardboard, but no damage, thankfully. So you do want to add just a tiny bit of hot glue as you're making your way around, and this detailing tip on my glue gun works perfect for this. I also, before I started, at the very end of my cord, I put a piece of tape around it before I cut it, and it does help keep your cord from fraying and unraveling on you. And then when I get to the end right here, I just did the same thing. Another piece of tape, scotch tape right there on the ends. I cut it off. Right, I thought I had gotten it pretty close, but it was not quite where I needed it to be, so I just snipped off that excess little tip and then a little more hot glue on the cardboard and the other end of the cord and just kind of tapped it down into place, and it just fit perfectly. Now I do want to cover up where the two pieces of cord meet and just where the cardboard is not so perfectly round, and I know it's looking like she got that off center. Well, I did that on purpose because I want the wreath on the napkin to show, and I'm just adding in some little bits and pieces of greenery. I keep all of my scraps in this big bag just for little projects like this, and I want to say that this came from the Dollar Tree. I did not use the two pine cones that's laying there on the table. They just didn't quite fit just right, so I did use another one. And as I was going back and I'm editing, I noticed that the pine cone looked awfully dark, so off camera I did hit that with a little bit of white paint just to make it look like it was covered in snow. I am going to continue to just add in more bits and pieces of greenery and a little bit more of the berries, just until I fill in any little gaps and holes, or cover up the hot glue, or until you feel that you have embellished it to your heart's content. Then all that's left to do is just add a hanger to the back. I've kind of marked my placement to make sure I get it straight, and adding some hot glue and some more of this cord to match the trim, and I'm going to put a little piece of ribbon over the bottom of the cord there just to give it a nice clean finish. If you are looking for large ornaments to fill in a tree and not have to spend a lot of money, this is the perfect way to do it. This was so easy, so much fun, and the camera is just not doing this beautiful ornament justice. It is so gorgeous. Yeah, we are going to create this beautiful Christmas picture for less than $10. And I love to do things like this for seasonal decor. And this gift bag came from Walmart. It was less than $5. I believe it was $3.98. And then the bulletin board came from the Dollar Tree Plus spot, but I'm going to be recycling it. I had started to use it for another project, just didn't work out, so we're going to use it to make our sign. I want my frame to have a sort of rustic farmhouse look, not too much because that's just not quite my jam. I like a slightly distressed look. But anyway, as I said earlier, I'm reusing this frame, and it's already been stained with folk art antiquing wax. And I'm taking this candle, and this is a technique I've never used before, to distress, and I'm just going around and hitting the frame in certain areas and just rubbing the wax back and forth over it because I want it to look distressed. This is my first time doing this, so I didn't want to go too crazy, with the wax, so we'll see how it looks in the end. And then I'm going to go in and give it 2 coats of of Rust-Oleum chalk paint and linen white. Once the paint had completely dried, I'm going in with my scraper and I'm just going along the edges and removing some of the paint. I really was afraid that I had not added enough of the wax because it is my first time, so I wasn't for sure how much I should add because I didn't really want it heavily distressed. I love how this has turned out, but if you want a more heavily distressed look, then I would add more wax and just keep going over it. But I did get a little heavy-handed in some areas, and I did gouge my frame just a bit, so I went over that with my sanding block and just smoothed everything out. I just used my scissors and a straight blade and went in and just trimmed it down to fit inside the frame. And now I'm going to add some Mod Podge, actually a lot of Mod Podge, and it does look like a lot, and it is a lot. And when I first put it on, I was like, oh my gosh, that's way too much. But actually, I ended up going in and adding a little bit more because I wanted a really good, not thick, but a really good, even layer on this board, just to make sure that the bag is going to adhere to it, because the gift bag is fairly thick. It's good quality from Walmart. And you see, I'm just smoothing it out really well. And then I'm going to go in with my bag or sign, and then I'm just going to very gently place it down. I'm not sure why I went in while it was wet, because originally I had planned to let it dry and use the iron method, but well, whatever, I got a little ahead of myself. But anyway, I'm going with it. I'm just pushing it in and just smoothing it down as best I can. It came out wonderful. I used my brayer. I just recently got that and never used it before, but it did really help smooth everything down. I had one little wrinkle, not sure what happened in the corner there, but I was able to smooth it out a good bit with the brayer. And y'all, I love this. This was so easy, so inexpensive. And if you go to Hobby Lobby and get a seasonal sign each season, those things add up, even with their 40 and 50% off. But y'all gotta tell me what you think about this. I realized after I finished filming that I had forgotten to fill in the holes at the top of the bag, so I just used a tiny bit of white puffy paint, a little bit of glitter, and they just blended right in and looked like snowflakes. I did not add any additional embellishment to this. Y'all know I love my embellishments, but I think it is just absolutely beautiful the way it is. It's just so simple and easy to make, and it's going to be a great addition to my Christmas decor this year. Thank you so much for stopping by and sharing a part of your day with me. I truly appreciate it if you found enjoyment in my video, and if you're still here, I'm hoping that you did, and you're not subscribed, I would love it if you would hit that subscribe button and leave me a comment down below and like and all that good stuff. It would really help my channel to continue to grow. And if you're looking for more Christmas inspiration, I have a great video right here on the screen just waiting for you to click on, and I'll see you next Sunday.